Welcome to episode 53 of Leading People with me, Jerry Moran. This episode is brought to you by Wide Circle, helping you make better talent decisions. To learn more, visit widecircle.eu. That's widecircle.eu. In today's episode, we dive deep with Brian Moran, a return guest, a celebrated best-selling author, and a pioneer of the 12-week year concept. How can redefining accountability influence our personal and professional growth? What does it really mean to hold someone accountable, and is it always about imposing consequences? And how can embracing a philosophy of ownership radically change the way we approach our goals and leadership? Stay tuned as Brian unpacks these questions and many more, sharing insights from his own personal journey that are bound to transform your approach to leadership and productivity. You won't want to miss this. So, let's hear what Brian has to say. Brian Moran, welcome back to Leading People.
Hey, thanks for having me back. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, I mean, you're one of the few guests I've had back, but there's a good reason for having you back today. I came across your latest book a few months before Christmas, read it in a day or two, whatever it took, devoured it, thought it was really excellent, building on all the great work you've done in the past, and it's actually 2 years since I had you on the show, so it's quite nice to have you back here. But some people are coming to this Leading People program new. They may not have heard your previous episode, so maybe let's start with who is Brian Moran, and tell us a little bit about how you've got to be an acclaimed author, and you've got this great 12-week methodology. So maybe we'll just start with that. Thanks.
Yeah, if you read my bio, I'm a New York Times bestselling author, consultant, coach, entrepreneur. My background, I started out in the corporate space and did really well, but had always had this inkling to be an entrepreneur, went out on my own and, struggled at first. Was used to having a lot of resources, a lot of people around me, but if you commit to it, you stay with it, it works out, and it's worked out pretty fantastic for me, I must say. So the first book was The 12-Week Year. It's in 15 languages, sold nearly 1 million copies. And our latest book that we're here to talk about is called Uncommon Accountability.
Yeah, and just to remind our listeners, because several of the listeners, some of the regulars anyway, have told me they bought the book and they're using the methodology. There's also a workbook, isn't there, for the 12-week year, which has lots of tools in it, and you've got a great website as well. So I think people should check that out.
Yeah, that'd be great.
At some stage. Not yet. Listen to the podcast. Okay. So uncommon accountability. What do you mean by uncommon accountability, and what was the purpose in writing this book?
Yeah, we wrote a couple chapters in 12-Week Year on accountability, and we have and when I say we, my business partner Michael Lennington co-authored the books with me, but we have a very different view of accountability, and that's what makes it uncommon. Is that I think most people think about accountability and certainly experience accountability as negative consequences. Most of the places you hear accountability spoken about is in a situation where someone's done something wrong and someone in authority is going to punish them. And that is not accountability. I mean, that's consequences. But you watch the news tonight, doesn't matter where you're at in the world, and someone will have done something they shouldn't have, and someone's going to say, hey, we're going to hold this person accountable. And what they're talking about is they're going to punish them. They're going to prosecute them. They're going to fine them. They're going to put them in something like that. And that's fine, right? But that's not accountability. That's consequences. And so we're kind of on a quest to help people really understand what accountability is and the true power of it.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, you listen to the news, and one of the first questions they want to have answered is, who is to blame?
Exactly. And so that's how people experience accountability, because they use those words interchangeably, right? We're going to hold them accountable, which means we're going to punish them. After we figure out who to fix the blame on.
Yeah, yeah. And often it's hard to actually find one person who you could blame anyway, because often these things come out of a process and there may be several actors involved. We don't know who created which problem for whom as they go along. So that's often what happens. And of course, if you think of accountability as consequences, at best you're going to get compliance. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and so, it shows up two levels, right? As an individual, I really don't want anything to do with that. If that's the concept of accountability, unconsciously and consciously, I'm not leaning into that. I don't want anything to do with that. As an organization then, and many organizations do, they look to blame people and hold them accountable in a way that is very unproductive and destroys the culture, quite candidly. It's interesting, Jerry. You got
you say
yeah. You've got companies that spend millions on building trust in an organization, and then they undermine it all the way they think about accountability and the way they act with people around that.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the book, you mentioned that you vetted this approach with thousands of individuals and organizations. And one of the things that you say early on is that you state that personal accountability is the bedrock upon which all sustained success in life is based. So perhaps you could elaborate on that whole aspect of personal accountability, because I think that's where it all starts, doesn't it? It's not just a question of, if you're going to be a leader out there, it's all about, first of all, answering to yourself, isn't it?
It is. And, everything that's driven by leaders has to first be practiced by a leader for the rest of the organization to really embrace it. If you're just talking the talk, nobody cares, right? And so that notion of personal accountability is really the understanding of accountability not as consequences, but as ownership. And it's based on the notion of free will choice, that we always, always, always have choice. And so if you think about it, if I hired on with you and you had stuff for me to do, do I have choice in that? Of course I do. I can do it or not do it. And so if I choose not to do it, what am I choosing? I'm probably choosing to work somewhere else. Doesn't make me a bad person. It makes me a bad fit. But there's a big difference. We talk about in the book, big difference between when we come at life as a choose to versus a have to. Because when life is a have to, it's very burdensome. At best, I kind of meet minimum standard. When I recognize that all life is choice, my energy shifts. And so, at the individual level, really understanding accountability as choice, as ownership, is a game changer in so many ways. Because there's this tendency for all of us to look outside of ourselves. We're waiting for someone or something to change. And when we do that, we're giving away our power, whether it's waiting for, over here in the States, waiting for inflation to come down, waiting for the politicians to stop arguing like that's ever going to happen, or whatever it is, right? But none of that we control. And so when we start to look at what we have control over, and we take ownership of the choices we're making, and we show up differently. When you stand differently, it affects everything around you.
Yeah, I think it's important for the listeners who might be saying, but the SH1T happens in the world, and I can't be accountable for everything that happens to me. You can be accountable for how, or you can take ownership of how you respond. Isn't that right?
Yeah. And here's the other thing. We're not saying there aren't real victims in life. There are, but there's this victim mindset that too many people have around, oh, why me? It never works for me. Or people are trying, things just never work out for me. Or I look to blame others, right? That's a victim mentality. And so the accountable mindset acknowledges the reality of what's happening around, but it also rests on the power that I have choice within that. Now, I might not like the choices I have, right? Yeah. Here, April 15th, you can pay your taxes or go to prison. I don't like either one of them, but you do have choice. And that's the empowering part of accountability, is that in any situation I'm in, I have choice. And recognizing that choice and coming from that place of choice and owning those choices, as opposed to looking at the victim mindset. The world happens to me, things happen to me, circumstances happen to me, and I have no control over it.
And you've had loads of conversations with people, partly in when you were developing this concept, but also you've already taken it into the marketplace and into companies and organizations. And what do you think is creating this victim type mindset in society today? Have you discovered a kind of pattern or something that you say, there's too much of this or too much of that seems to be contributing to this? Because it's rampant, it's everywhere,
It is rampant, but I think it's been around since the beginning of time. When God asked Adam why he ate the fruit, he blamed Eve, right? So, I mean, it's been around quite a while. In fact, he blamed God. It's the woman you gave me, God. And so it's not anything new. Yeah. I just think that, nowadays, it does seem like it's growing in popularity, just because one is people have never been taught, and the more you experience that, if people are blaming you, the natural thing, the easy thing is to shift the blame, and so that's the game, right? Shift the blame, and you see that all over the media with the politicians. You see it on social media. And so I think that's what's learned, right? We live what we learn, and so when you grow up with that. And you know that if you own up to something as a kid, punishments come, and you learn pretty quickly to, I didn't, it was Bobby or whatever it was, right? You learn it was your brother, it was your sister, it was, and so I think it's just learned, to be honest with you, Jerry.
Enjoying the insights and inspiration? Make sure to catch every episode by subscribing to Leading People on your favorite podcast platform. And please take a moment to rate us. Your feedback makes all the difference. Remember to follow us on our social media channels and join our LinkedIn group for more content and connection with like-minded professionals. Stay connected, stay informed, and let's grow together. Let's get into some examples, because you quite interestingly, you take 4 areas of life and you work through these 4 areas, which is health, career, finances, and relationships. And you're actually quite open about some of your own experiences, even in this regard. And that, can you make this idea of the accountability, personal accountability, and holding ourselves accountable? Can you give the listeners a few examples of things that they could relate to in their daily life around maybe these 4 themes? Just examples they could say, that's what he means by holding myself accountable.
Yeah, we took those 4 themes because I think they're the big themes in life. If you're doing well in those areas, life is pretty good. Starting with your health, so many people just have not taken ownership of their health. You look at the number of people on medications and statins and things like that to a large degree are controllable by lifestyle. But instead of owning it and changing their lifestyle, they pop the pill. And that's the modern day solution, right? Just take the pill. But anytime you're taking any kind of medication, there's side effects to that, adverse side effects. And so they start to compound. And so, looking at your health, Judy and I are both cancer survivors, and that causes you to really take a good hard look at what you're putting in your body, how you're exercising, are you getting enough sleep? And it's really easy to not do that, to just kind of go along and but when you take ownership of it, you realize that your health, it's that old saying, it's just easy to take that for granted, right? And until you don't have it. And so taking ownership of that means really looking at, what do I need in terms of health to perform, to live the life I want to live. And so I started late. I had my first daughter at 40. For me to see my grandkids and for them to know me, one, I need God's blessing, but I got to do everything I can too. I can't, so I've got a workout regimen. We eat pretty. We're not fanatical with it, but we eat healthy and we mind the diet that way. And it's the same thing, in those other areas as well. Your career, I just see people that are stuck in jobs or careers that they lament, they hate going to work, and it's like, well, that's a choice. You don't have to work there. They'll tell you they feel trapped and again, that's a choice. You can begin to make different choices and set yourself up to have the kind of career you want. And I'm not saying it's easy, but anything worthwhile in life takes effort. And most people, they want the a certain life, but they're not willing to do the work.
Yeah.
And that's when I talk about owning it, is not only owning the outcome you're after, but most importantly, owning what you need to do to create that outcome, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's your finances, whether it's your health, whether it's your career. If you want something better, you've got to own the actions to get there, the actions that are causing you to be where you're at currently, as opposed to, again, looking outside yourself and saying, well, it was the circumstances. Yes, circumstances play a role, but again, the choices you make in those circumstances make a big difference. It's the example, someone cuts you off in traffic, one person gets road rage, the other person, no big deal. What's different? It's how they process it, how they think about it, and how they respond to it. So how you think about those areas of your life really have a huge impact on how you show up.
Yeah. I guess this is what you're alluding to when you talk about mindset. You need to start with the mindset, to really explore how you're processing the world around you. Are you one of these people who gets upset all the time when somebody doesn't move off on a red light or cuts you off or are you actually, so I guess, and you're also, what's really nice about the way you've created the 12-week year was you really took that notion that strategy is about execution, and it's okay to have goals, but if you don't do anything, you're not going to see any results. And what I like about this book is you really take that further. You really take it out there and challenge people to think about, are they owning their experience? Are they owning the things that they're doing? Are they doing the things they need to do to achieve the things they want, right?
Yeah. And owning doesn't mean blame. It's really important to understand that. Owning my situation doesn't mean I'm blaming for it. A victim mindset looks back, right? It looks back at the things that happened and tries to shift blame. An accountability mindset is more focused about the future. Okay, this is what happened, and I want to be curious. I want to learn from it. I'm not fixing blame. We talk about how the 12-week year is a guilt-free zone, and it goes with uncommon accountability. It's not about blaming yourself. It's about looking back and understanding what are the choices I made in the situation that contributed to the outcome. If I'm experiencing something I don't care for, what choices did I make that contributed to it? Not blaming me that I caused it, I'm bad, I'm evil, whatever. Just what might I do differently? See, that's the future aspect of it. We look back to learn so that we can experience more of what we want in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned energy early on in our conversation. And of course, if you're running victim mentality and you're carrying around the burdens of the past, your energy is going to be... it's going to affect your energy, and it's going to deplete your energy, and it's going to make you tired and lethargic. So it's going to affect your ability to actually do the things you want to do anyway. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And you do it long enough and hard enough, and it ultimately affects your health in an adverse way.
Yeah. Okay, so the nice contrast frame you set up on this is you start talking about holding people capable. So if we get into now the organizational space on this one, and you talked about organizations spending millions and millions and millions and then undermining all that with how they implement consequence-based accountability. And of course, there's so much talk today about things like psychological safety out there. And I think what you're writing about here is a factor that needs to be considered if you're talking about these things like psychological safety. But if we get down to this notion now from a leader's perspective, and so there's people out there listening to this who manage people and lead organizations, etc., right? So what now can they start to process? Because I really want to get into this notion of holding somebody capable. So how does that work?
Yeah. So if you understand accountability as choice, as ownership, as a leader, it changes everything, because every leader in every organization we've ever worked in has been taught to hold their people accountable. That's what good leaders do. And we challenge that notion because, again, what's at the heart of that, when we're talking about holding someone accountable, what they're really talking about is when someone doesn't do what they're supposed to do, we go in and we create some sort of a punishment. It could be a chewing out. It could be a firing, somewhere in between. But that's the notion of hold your team accountable. It's get after them hard when they don't do what they're supposed to do. And the problem with that, Jerry, is that if you think about the last time that happened to you, right, what's the natural tendency when you're on the receiving end of that? Well, it's to make excuses, it's to push back, it's to shift blame, all the things the leader doesn't want. And so when we hold people accountable in that way, you're going to get minimum performance. You're going to get just enough performance to stop the negative consequences. And the second problem with that is not only are you getting minimum performance, but you're going to get collateral damage, because it destroys the relationship. And I'll give you an example. We did a workshop on this with a group, and there was a young lady there, really, really smart, really talented. And as we were talking through this, she said, you know what? I'm living that right now. She says, my boss holds me accountable, and I can't stand him. I do everything I can to avoid him. I give him the minimum just so I don't have to spend any time with him. And this is a lady who was super talented. And so he was getting the absolute minimum from her. And she was, and as you might imagine, she was looking for a different position with a different company because of that. But people go, well, that's an extreme case. No, that's an everyday case that happens when you try and hold people accountable that way. It destroys the relationship. It really limits your people's ability to perform. So you're limiting the performance of the organization. But that's all anybody's been taught. They've been taught this consequence model, and they haven't even really been taught it, because there's a lot to a consequence model that people don't even understand. So they're trying to apply it without even being taught. And on top of that, it's a flawed model to begin with. You'll never get discretionary effort with negative consequences. You'll never get that extra effort. And that's what it takes to really thrive as a leader, as an organization, is that extra effort for people. And so we talk about, stop holding your people accountable, hold them capable.
Coming up next, Brian shares groundbreaking strategies for leaders to foster a culture of capability rather than consequence. Learn how transforming your approach to accountability can lead to profound changes in organizational performance and culture.
Now, when people hear that, they go, wow, that's semantics. It's not. It's subtle, but it's profoundly different in that instead of confronting with consequences, we confront with choice. Because again, accountability is based on free will choice. So we confront with the choice. Look, you don't have to work here, right? You don't have to work here. But if you're going to work here, we have standards. So as a leader, I'm not lowering my standards for you, but it's your job to get there. It's not my burden. It's your burden to perform. My job's to help you, to clarify what's expected. But if that's not something you're willing to do, then you're not a good fit. I mean, it's really that simple. But as simple as that is, it creates completely different conversation.
Yeah.
And different outcomes. And so, again, going to an example from a different workshop, this gentleman there, he was a district manager, had a number, I think 20, 30 managers with him. And he was, he talked about this one guy who started out really great. And about 2 years in, his performance started to drop off. And he's been trying to hold this guy accountable for probably 18 months now. And it's a disaster. And so he said, screw it, I'm going to try it. I've got nothing to lose. So after doing the workshop, he goes back and he has this conversation with his direct report. He says, look, man, part of this is my fault. I've been holding you accountable. I'm done doing that. It's your job to perform. It's your burden. Here's the expectation. Here's the standard. And it was a really good conversation. But in the end, he said, what do you want to do? And the guy said, well, I appreciate the conversation. I want to talk about it. I want to talk to my wife and whatnot. So they got back together a few days later. And the guy said to him, you know what? You're right. I've been making excuses. That's not who I am. That's not how I want to show up. And you won't see that anymore. And he literally turned his performance around that week. And within, I think, 6 months became his top performer. Now, it might have gone the other way. He might have said, I'm out of here. But either way, that's the right choice. And that happened because the district manager confronted him with the choice. He stopped trying to force things on him and said, look, you have choices here. But one of the choices isn't to lower the standard. That's a choice of not working here. So you either choose to do the work and embrace the standard and hit it or exceed it, or go work somewhere else. And so a much different conversation, much different outcome, and different for the culture as well.
Mm. And you're also indirectly helping that person who's gone through that process and who has made that choice. You're actually helping them, because what you're actually doing is asking them to hold themselves accountable, and in the traditional sense, right? They're holding themselves accountable, and they learn how to take on more responsibility. They're going to become better managers themselves, because they understand that, if you promise things and there's a performance expected, you have to deliver, and they're able to hold their own people to standards when they get those jobs, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it goes beyond work. It affects their life as well, because when you experience how that works in one area of your life, you apply it in other areas. And so you start to see it in relationships, with your family, with your spouse, with your partner, and you stand in those relationships differently, and it changes the relationship. Most divorces are because they're blaming each other.
Yeah, and
you talk to anyone right? Mm-hmm. And okay, so what role did I play in it? Not about blame. It's about how do we make the future better than the past.
Yeah. And the book is full of anecdotes and stories about, like, the district manager or the young talent lady. There's loads of those for the reader to go and delve into, and some of your own personal stories where you, as I say, you're quite open and candid about some of the experiences you've had in your business and other things. And so I think that makes the book really readable and so human. You kind of can read this and say, this guy's pretty open and honest about this. He's not trying to come up with some new BS out there. He's really coming at this from a solid place.
Appreciate that. Yeah,
that was my impression. Yeah. That was my impression anyway when I was reading the book. Okay, so coming to the end, if you we have leaders out there now, or people who aspire to be leaders, or anybody out there who's in the workplace and they're not. Let's put it this way: one of the things that this is related to, I think, is engagement in the workplace, and the money that is spent on this, and it comes down to a basic ability to have conversations about what's expected and having people who are productive and enthusiastic in the work. But if you were to come down now and just say to some people out there, here's 2 or 3 things you should start doing tomorrow or today after you listen to this podcast, what would those couple of things be that you, apart from buying the book, of course, but what would those couple of things be that you could say, really, you need to start exploring this, and you can already start working on this from the get-go?
Yeah, the big one would be just to be mindful about, when you're kind of leaning into the victim mindset, when you're feeling sorry for yourself, when you're looking to shift blame. And it's interesting because no matter how long you practice this concept, there's always areas in your life and times when that victim mindset creeps in. And so you got to guard against it. So the first step is just being mindful and seeing where you do that. And then pausing for a moment and say, is there a better way?
What sort of language goes with that, Brian? Just give us an example of something where if you catch yourself, how would you know you were playing the victim mindset? Just in case people are not clear about that.
Yeah, so sometimes it's not in the moment, sometimes it's later. So something happens, I don't like the way it worked out. Maybe it's a conversation with my wife, and I'll go back to that later and think through, okay, what happened there? What did I do? What could I have done different? That's the big question. Given what happened, given what I know now, what could I have done different? And one of those things, a couple of questions are, what did I pretend not to know in the situation? Right? Where have I done this before? Is this a tendency I have? And the big thing is, if I had to do it again, what would I do different? Because if you do something different, you're going to get a different outcome. Now, it still might not be the one you want, but that's how it works. And so just kind of this metacognition on how I behaved in a certain situation, viewing that from afar without blame, but looking at it and saying, okay, that didn't turn out the way I wanted. What happened there? What tendencies do I have in those situations that aren't productive? And how could I change that? How could I do that different next time so that when I'm in that situation again, the outcome's much more positive.
So you're able to identify the trigger that sets you off and make a choice, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Choose some other.
Just choose something different, right?
And find out, does that work better?
Yeah. So often, we respond almost habitually. Something happens and boom, it's and we've developed these patterns, and it's just sometimes putting a little space between the experience and your reaction, and just digging into what's going on for me, my mindset, so that I can make a different choice in the moment.
Okay, and if you're a manager out there and somebody is screwed up on the team, what would be a piece of advice or a tip for them to do? Of course, we want them to think about it, but what might be a reframe for them?
So start with the notion of accountability as choice as ownership, and confront that breakdown from that standpoint. In other words, don't go in to punish the person, because all that's going to do is going to shut them down. And here's the thing with consequence management. Punishment or penalty is great for stopping something, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be replaced with something more positive. So if someone's in a life-threatening situation, you might use that, right? But it doesn't mean that a positive behavior is going to come out of it. So just let that go, right? Think about this. The reality is, Jared, can you force someone to do something? You really can't. You might create a consequence that's so distasteful that they choose to do it, but that's where all the collateral damage comes in and all that. So really, being mindful about confronting them with the choices they have. So when someone's not performing, what you want to do is you want to have them participate in their own self-improvement. It's not something you do to them. Punishment is something you do to them. You want someone to perform better. You want to have them participate in that process. How do I do that? I probably lead with questions. So tell me what happened there. Tell me about, are you clear of the standard? Some of the things we just talked about, what did you do you think led to this outcome? What would you do different next time? Right? Those are the conversations that lead to ownership, as opposed to just going in with consequences and saying, hey, this didn't work. Don't do that again. If you do it again, we'll be back here and I'll be punishing you again, kind of thing.
Yeah. So, lots of great tips and advice, lots more in the book. You can buy it on all the leading bookshops like Amazon, etc. Can you buy it on the website as well, Brian?
Yeah, 12weekyear.com. So the number 12weekyear.com is where you can find us. We typically run a workshop once a month. And so that's a great thing. If you want to get involved in that, love that. But we have all kinds of resources, as you mentioned, Jerry. So 12weekyear.com.
So I'll put some links in the show notes. How can people get in contact? What's the best way to get in contact with you, Brian, if people like what they hear today and they want to check in with you? Because you got some great products on your website. I bought your software there recently. What goes with the 12-week year. I'm enjoying that. It's really, really good. And LinkedIn?
LinkedIn as well. Yep.
If people write to you on LinkedIn, they can always connect with you. They'll find out what's going on as well there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, Brian Moran, thanks once again for sharing your insights, tips, and wisdom with me and our listeners today.
Thanks for having me, Jerry. It was great.
Next, on Leading People.
If you don't allow mistakes, people don't do anything anymore, so you have to allow mistakes. Preferably not twice the same. That would be stupid. But that's one of the reasons. I want to have fun in the way I work. It's got to be pleasant. So try to create an environment where everyone happy is in his work.
Join me and former DHL and Brussels Airlines CEO, Rob Kuipers, as he shares riveting stories from his 60-year globe-trotting career. We'll dive into the insights of a man who transformed challenges into opportunities, crafting a legacy in the fast-paced worlds of international logistics and aviation. Among other things, we'll explore questions such as, how does a competitive spirit shape a leader? How do you get the best performances out of your people? And what career advice does he have for us all? You might be surprised at what he has to say. Until next time.